I always believed being the responsible one would pay off, but it just made me an easy target. When my younger sister rolled up in a pristine pearl white Civic, screaming that Dad had made it happen. My stomach knotted. I was driving a rusted sedan that stalled at red lights, while my grandfather's trust fund, money meant for my future, was suddenly parked in her spot. Gleaming under the suburban street lamps, the radiator in my apartment made a sound like a dying kettle. A high-pitched wheeze that kicked in every time the thermostat tried to push the temperature past 65 degrees. I lay in bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like the state of Florida, and listened to the hiss. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. The air in Brookfield was already turning gray and biting, the kind of cold that seeped through the single-pane windows of my rental and settled deep in your bones. I rolled over and tapped my phone screen. The first notification was from my banking app, a cheerful reminder that my student loan auto draft of $412 had successfully processed. My stomach gave a familiar, hollow lurch. That left me with exactly $87 to last until Friday. I am 32 years old. I told myself, forcing my legs to swing out from under the duvet. I am a project manager. I am a responsible adult. But as I stood in the shower, watching the water swirl down the drain, I didn't feel like a project manager. I felt like a juggler waiting for the first ball to drop. My title at Lumen Vista Media sounded impressive on LinkedIn, junior project manager, but in reality, it meant I spent 45 hours a week herding cats, soothing the egos of graphic designers, and updating Gantt charts for a salary that hadn't been adjusted for inflation in 3 years. I dressed in my usual uniform of dark slacks and a sensible sweater, grabbed a travel mug of coffee I had brewed at home to save $3, and walked out to my car. My car was a 10-year-old sedan, the color of a bruised plum, with a check engine light that had been glowing steadfastly for 6 months. I patted the dashboard as I turned the key. "Come on, old girl," I whispered. "Just get me through the winter." The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a rattle that shook the steering wheel. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was my life, managing, coping, being the steady one, the one who didn't ask for help because she was terrified of the answer. My phone buzzed in the cup holder as I merged onto the highway. The car display read, "Mom." I let it ring twice before answering via Bluetooth. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice even. "Abby, honey, did you get the invite for Sunday dinner?" Linda Jackson's voice was high and breathy, a tone she reserved for when she wanted everything to be perfect. I did. I said, "I'll be there. Is everything okay?" "Oh, everything is wonderful," she said, and I could hear the clatter of dishes in the background. "We are just so excited. Emily is coming home for the weekend from her clinicals. She has had such a hard week. Poor thing. Those nursing instructors are just brutal on her." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Emily was 24. She was my sister. And I loved her. But the way my parents spoke about her, you would think she was a fragile Victorian doll being forced to work in a coal mine. "That is too bad," I said, my voice neutral. "I am sure she's doing fine. Though, she is smart. She is exhausted. Abby," my mother corrected, "Mark and I just want to give her a little boost, a little celebration. You will bring that potato salad Grandma likes?" Grandma isn't eating much potato salad these days. "Mom," I said, glancing at the clock. I was going to be late if the traffic didn't clear. "She is barely eating Jell-O. Well, bring it anyway, for the rest of us. And try to be early. Your father wants to grill if the weather holds." I promised I would be there and ended the call. The silence filled the car again, heavy and familiar. I was the reliable one, the one who brought the potato salad, the one who paid her own bills and drove a car that sounded like a tractor. Emily was the one who needed boosting. It was a dynamic as old as the scratches on my kitchen table. And usually, I could ignore it. Usually, after work, I didn't go home. I drove toward the edge of town, where the suburban sprawl gave way to the quiet, wooded grounds of Willow Ridge Hospice Center. This had been my routine for the last 3 months. Ever since my grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, had decided she was done with hospitals and aggressive treatments. She had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, a thief that had stolen her energy and her appetite, but had somehow left her sharp wit entirely touched. The facility smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a scent that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. I walked down the carpeted hallway to room 304. Grandma Eleanor was awake, propped up against a mountain of pillows, looking out the window at the bare branches of a maple tree. She looked smaller than she had 2 days ago. Her skin was like parchment paper, translucent and delicate, revealing the map of blue veins beneath. "Hey, you," I said softly, stepping into the room. She turned, and her eyes, the same hazel as mine, crinkled at the corners. "Abigail, you look tired. Takes one to know one," I said, dropping my bag in the corner and pulling the visitor chair close to the bed. "I brought you the vanilla latte. Decaf, extra foam, just how you like it to smell, even if you don't drink it." She smiled and took the cup with a trembling hand, inhaling the steam. "That is heaven. Your mother brought me herbal tea yesterday. It tasted like hot grass clippings." I laughed, the knot in my chest loosening for the first time all day. "Mom means well. Your mother means to control everything she can touch," Eleanor said, setting the cup down on the rolling table, "including me. But enough about Linda. How are you? And do not give me the fine speech. I changed your diapers. Abigail, I know when you are lying." I sighed, leaning back in the chair. "It is just money, Grandma. Always money. My rent went up $50. The car needs new brakes, and the student loan interest seems to grow faster than I can pay it down. I feel like I'm running on a treadmill that is set just a little too fast." Eleanor's face darkened. She looked away, her gaze returning to the window. "It should not be this hard for you," she murmured. "It is hard for everyone," I said, trying to be dismissive. "Not for everyone," she said sharply, "and not for you." Arthur made sure of that. I stiffened. We had danced around this topic before, but never this directly. My grandfather, Arthur Hayes, had died when I was 19. He was a man of few words but deep, deliberate actions. "Grandma," I said gently, "we have talked about this. Mom and Dad said the market crash in 2008 hit the trust hard, and then college tuition was more than they expected." Eleanor made a sound in her throat, a scoff that turned into a cough. I handed her a cup of water, waiting until her breathing settled. "Your grandfather was not a gambler, Abigail," she whispered, her voice raspy. "He put that money in low-risk bonds, conservative growth. It was a future fund. That is what he called it. The future fund. It was meant to buy you a house or start a business. It was not meant to vanish into thin air because of a market dip." I looked at my hands. I remembered signing papers when I was 19, sitting at the kitchen table with my parents. I remembered my father, Mark, sliding documents toward me, pointing where to sign. Just a formality. "Abby, we are moving it to a better account for school." I had trusted them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. They did pay for my tuition. I reminded her, most of it. I had to take out loans for the last 2 years and living expenses. "But 2 years of loans," she interrupted. "When Arthur left enough to put 3 of you through medical school." The room went quiet. The only sound was the hum of the oxygen concentrator in the corner. "Where did it go?" "Grandma?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. She closed her eyes, looking suddenly very exhausted. "Mark is a dreamer," she said, her voice barely audible. "And Linda wants everyone to think they are doing better than they are. It is a dangerous combination." She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Don't let them make you feel small. You are the strongest one in that house. You always have been." I stayed for another hour, reading to her from an old paperback mystery she loved, until she fell asleep. Walking back to my car. The cold air felt sharper than before. The doubt she had planted was blooming. rooted in the unease I had felt for years. But I pushed it down. They were my parents. They loved me. They wouldn't steal from me. They were just bad with money. There was a difference. I drove home, ate a frozen burrito that was scorching hot on the ends and icy in the middle, and collapsed onto my couch. It was 9:30, the dangerous hour, the time when I was too tired to be productive, but not tired enough to sleep. I pulled out my phone and opened social media. Mindless scrolling becoming a sedative. A friend from college got engaged. Like, an ad for shoes I couldn't afford. Scroll. A video of a golden retriever. Smile. And then, there it was. The post was from Emily. It had been uploaded 20 minutes ago. The photo was high quality, likely taken on the newest iPhone model my parents had bought her for Christmas. Emily was standing in the driveway of my parents' house. She was wearing a nursing school sweatshirt and leggings, her blonde hair perfectly messy. She was leaning against a car, not just a car, a pearl white Honda Civic. It looked immaculate. The paint held the reflection of the streetlights. It wasn't brand new, maybe 2 or 3 years old, but it was light years ahead of my plum-colored disaster. It had a sunroof. It had alloy wheels. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. The caption read, "When Dad believes in your dreams more than you do. Best surprise ever." I felt a physical kick in my chest. A Civic like that, even used, was easily $18,000 or $20,000 in this market. I clicked on the comments. "OMG lucky. You deserve it, babe. Ride to clinicals in style." And then, a comment from Linda Jackson. "Our hard worker. You deserve it all." My phone slipped from my hand and landed on the couch cushion. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the radiator hissing its mocking tune. Dad believed in her dreams. Dad, who had told me 3 months ago that he couldn't help me with my car repair bill because things are tight right now. Abby, you know how it is. Dad, who wore the same Carhartt jacket he had owned for 15 years because he didn't see the point in wasting money on clothes. Where did they get $20,000? I picked the phone up again. I zoomed in on the photo. In the background, I could see the edge of the garage. The paint was peeling on the door. The siding needed a power wash. It was the house of people who were, as they constantly reminded me, squeezed. I felt a heat rising up my neck, a mix of jealousy and confusion. Maybe they financed it. Maybe they took out a loan. But with their credit? I knew for a fact they had been rejected for a refinancing application last year because I had helped them scan the documents. I didn't sleep well that night. I dreamed of check engine lights and sinking ships. Sunday arrived with a gray, overcast sky. I made the potato salad. I put on my nice sweater. I drove to the house I had grown up in, a 2-story colonial that had seen better days. The Civic was parked in the driveway, occupying the prime spot. My father's rusted pickup truck was relegated to the street. Seeing the car in person was worse than the photo. It looked pristine. It had that smell, that specialized chemical smell of dealership detailing. I parked behind it and walked up the driveway. Emily burst out the front door before I even knocked. "Abby," she squealed, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of expensive vanilla perfume. "Did you see it?" I pulled back, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of wax. "I saw. It is beautiful. It drives so smooth," she gushed, grabbing my hand and dragging me toward it. "Look, it has heated seats. Heated seats. Abby, I am going to be so toasty driving to the hospital at 5 in the morning. That is great," I said. "Really great." My father came out onto the porch. Mark Jackson was a big man, broad-shouldered, with hands roughened by decades of construction work. He was wearing his Sunday flannel, the one with the frayed collar. "Hey, kiddo," he said, coming down the steps. "Hi, Dad," I said. "Nice car?" He shifted his weight, looking briefly at the Civic, and then at the ground. "Yeah, well, she needs a reliable ride. Can't have her breaking down on the highway in the middle of the night. Safety first." "Right," I said. "Safety?" I looked at his boots. The leather was cracked at the toe. He had been talking about buying new ones since last Christmas. We went inside. The house was warm, smelling of roast beef and onions. My mother, Linda, was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter with a frantic energy. "Hi, honey," she called out. "Put the salad on the table. Dinner is almost ready." I did as I was told. The dining room table was set with the good china, the set we usually only used for Thanksgiving. We sat down. The conversation, inevitably, revolved around Emily, how her clinical rotation in pediatrics was going, how tired she was, how the new car was going to change her life. "I am just so relieved," Linda said, passing the rolls. "I was so worried about her driving that old beater she had. Now I can sleep at night." I buttered a roll, keeping my eyes on my plate. "What about the financing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Interest rates are pretty high right now." The table went quiet for a split second. "Oh, we handled it," Mark said, taking a large bite of roast beef. "You financed it?" I pressed. "We worked it out," Linda said quickly, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "Don't worry about it, Abby. Just be happy for your sister." "I am happy," I said. "I am just surprised. You guys were saying last week how high the heating bill was." "We are squeezed," Linda admitted, sighing dramatically. "The price of groceries is criminal. I had to put the roast on the credit card, but some things are priorities. Emily's safety is a priority." I chewed slowly. The food tasted like ash. So, Emily's safety was a priority worth $20,000, but my safety, driving a car that stalled in intersections, was just a character-building exercise? The resentment was a bitter pill, dissolving in my stomach, but it wasn't just jealousy, it was the math. It simply didn't add up. If they were putting roast beef on a Visa, they weren't buying cars with cash. And if they financed it, the monthly payment would be crippling. After dinner, Emily went to the living room to text her friends. I stayed behind to help clear the table. "Go sit down." "Mark," Linda said. "Abby and I have this." Mark grunted and headed for the back porch to smoke a cigarette. I carried a stack of plates into the kitchen. The water was running in the sink, loud and splashing. I went back to the dining room for the serving platter. As I approached the kitchen doorway again, I heard Mark come in from the back porch. The water was turned off. Linda's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Should not have asked about the financing. She is sharp. Mark, she is just jealous." Mark's voice rumbled. "She will get over it. We need to be careful." Linda hissed. "If she asks for help with her loans again, tell her no." Mark said, "We have done enough. We raised her." I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the platter of cold roast beef. "It is a lot of money." "Mark," Linda said. "I worry it was too much at once. It was for the girls anyway," Mark said, his voice sounding defensive. "That is what Arthur wanted. For the girls, Abby got her college. Emily gets a start. But stop worrying. Linda, that account was finally being useful for something other than gathering dust. Besides, she is 32. She doesn't need a safety net anymore." I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned and walked silently back to the dining room table. Setting the platter down with trembling hands, that account, Abby got her college. The blood rushed in my ears. They weren't talking about their savings. They weren't talking about a bank loan. They were talking about the trust. Grandpa's future fund. I felt a wave of nausea. I needed to get out of there. But if I left now, they would know I heard. I took a deep breath, forcing my face into a mask of calm. I walked into the kitchen. "All done?" I asked brightly. Linda jumped, spinning around. "Oh, you startled me." "Yes, just loading the dishwasher." I helped them finish. I dried the pots. I made small talk about the weather. I hugged Emily and told her to drive safe. I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing. Abby got her college, but they hadn't paid for all of it. I had $40,000 in student loans. I had paid for my own books. I had worked 2 jobs in the campus library and the coffee shop. If the trust was meant for college, why did I have debt? And if the trust was for both of us, why was I hearing about it now, in a whispered kitchen conversation, as an explanation for a luxury purchase for my sister? When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to the second bedroom, which I used as a storage closet. I shoved aside the vacuum cleaner and the winter coats. I pulled down a plastic bin labeled childhood/school. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the smell of dust and old paper. I dug through high school yearbooks, participation ribbons, and old birthday cards. At the bottom of the bin, buried under a stack of graded essays, was a manila folder. It was faded, the edges curled. I opened it. The document on top was titled Declaration of Trust. It was dated 14 years ago. I flipped through the pages. The legal jargon was dense, but the names were clear. Grantor: Arthur William Hayes. Trustees: Mark Jackson and Linda Jackson. Primary beneficiary: Abigail Marie Jackson. I froze. Primary beneficiary: not the girls, not the family, Abigail Marie Jackson. I scanned the paragraphs, my finger tracing the lines. There was a section about the distribution of funds. Funds to be used for the health, education, and maintenance of the beneficiary. Remaining principal to be distributed to the beneficiary upon her 35th birthday. I read it again. 35th birthday. I was 32. The money was supposed to be sitting there, growing, waiting for me to buy a house, waiting for me to start a life. I looked at the date of the last signature. It was my signature, from when I was 19, acknowledging the trustees. I sat back against the wall, the folder heavy in my lap. If the money was supposed to be there until I was 35, how did they use it to buy a car? A sick twist of suspicion coiled in my gut. Mark's words echoed in my head. That account was finally being useful. They hadn't just dipped into savings. They hadn't just favored Emily. They had cracked open the vault that was legally, morally, and specifically meant for my future. I looked at the header of the document again. Horizon First Credit Union. I checked the time. It was 11 at night. The bank was closed. But tomorrow, it wouldn't be. I closed the folder, my hands shaking not from cold, but from a rage that was starting to burn hot and bright. I wasn't just the responsible daughter anymore. I was the beneficiary. And I was going to find out exactly what they had done with my inheritance. Monday morning arrived with the subtle, crushing weight of a hangover. Though I had not touched a drop of alcohol, it was the hangover of realization, the chemical afterburn of adrenaline that had been pumping through my system since I found the folder in the closet. I sat at my desk at Lumen Vista Media, staring at a spreadsheet that detailed the timeline for a website launch I was supposed to be managing. The colors on the screen, bright greens for on track and alarming reds for delayed, blurred into a meaningless smear. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. I had the folder in my tote bag, tucked beneath my packed lunch of leftover pasta. Every time I looked at the bag, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. At 10 o'clock, I stood up. My legs felt heavy, as if I were wading through water. I am taking an early lunch, I told the office manager, who barely looked up from her typing. I walked out to the parking lot and climbed into my plum-colored sedan. The interior was freezing, retaining the chill of the night. I didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there, gripping my phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. Horizon First Credit Union. The number was saved in my phone now, copied from their website the night before. I pressed call. The automated system was a cheerful, robotic female voice that asked me to press 1 for English, 2 for checking, 3 for loans. I pressed 0 repeatedly, a childish act of defiance. Until the music started, it was a smooth jazz loop that sounded like it was being played underwater. Horizon First. This is Kevin. How can I help you? The voice was young, bored, and startlingly human after the robot. Hi, I said, my voice cracking. I cleared my throat. Hi, I am calling to inquire about a trust account. I am the beneficiary, and I just wanted to check the status. I don't have the account number handy, but I can give you my social. Name? Kevin asked, the sound of keyboard clacking filling the silence. Abigail Jackson. One moment. Ms. Jackson, let me pull you up. The silence stretched. A crow landed on the hood of a car 3 rows away, pecking at a fast food wrapper. I watched it, focusing on the jerky movements of its head to keep from hyperventilating. "Okay, I see you here," Kevin said, his tone shifting. He sounded more alert now. "You are listed as the primary beneficiary on the Hayes-Jackson Trust. Trustees are Mark and Linda Jackson." "Yes," I said, "that is the one. I haven't received a statement in a while. I just wanted to know the current balance." There was a pause, a long, heavy pause that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Ma'am, for detailed transaction history, you would really need to speak to the trustees. They are the authorized signers." "I know that," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, "but as the beneficiary, I am entitled to know the balance. It is my trust." "Well, right," Kevin said. He sounded uncomfortable. "But there isn't much to report. The account is currently, let's see, the balance is $412.16. The number hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, a sharp intake of air that fogged up the cold window. 400? I repeated. 412.16, he confirmed. I closed my eyes. The folder in my bag, the one from 14 years ago, didn't list a starting balance. But I knew my grandfather. He had sold a successful hardware business before he died. He wasn't a man who left $400. Was it always that low? I asked. "No," Kevin said, looking at the history. "It looks like there was significantly more activity about 2 years ago, a series of large withdrawals, and then some smaller ones recently." "Withdrawals?" I echoed. "Who signed for them?" "The trustees, Mark and Linda Jackson." I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. "Can you send me the statements?" I asked. "I need to see them. All of them. Going back 5 years. I can mail them to the address on file," Kevin said, "or I can upload them to the Secure Document Center if you can verify your identity." "Upload them," I said. "Please. Today." I spent the next hour in a daze. I verified my security questions. Mother's maiden name, Hayes. First pet, Buster. High school mascot, the Titan. When the notification chimed on my phone indicating the documents were ready, I didn't open them immediately. I couldn't do it in the car. It felt too small, too suffocating. I drove back to the office, walked to the printer room, and sent the file from my phone to the secure print queue. I waited until the room was empty before I swiped my badge. The machine whirred and spat out paper, page after page, a thick stack of warm, white indictment. I took the stack to the furthest stall in the women's restroom and locked the door. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet, my expensive slacks bunching around my knees, and began to read. The starting balance 5 years ago was $162,000. I stared at the number. 162,000. That was a house. That was my student loans paid off 3 times over. That was freedom. I turned the pages, watching the money bleed out. 2 years ago, there were 3 checks written in rapid succession: $30,000, $45,000, $25,000. The memo lines were blank. Then, silence for a year. The balance hovered around 60,000. Then, 3 weeks ago, cashier's check, Brookfield Auto Mall, $22,500. I stopped breathing. The date matched the week Emily got the car. The amount matched the price of a gently used pearl white Civic with low mileage and heated seats. My parents hadn't financed the car. They hadn't put it on a credit card. They had walked into the bank, signed a check drawn from my future, and handed it to a car salesman so my sister could drive to her clinicals in style. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal sound of rage and grief, but I swallowed it down. I shoved the papers into my bag and walked out of the stall. I washed my hands. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I looked the same. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a practical clip. But I wasn't the same. I was a victim of theft. And the thieves were the people who had taught me to tie my shoes. I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't carry this alone. The weight of it was crushing my lungs. At noon, I grabbed Tessa Morgan. Tessa was the senior graphic designer at Lumen Vista, a woman with bright red hair, a collection of vintage band t-shirts, and a moral compass that pointed true north with aggressive precision. "Hey, you want to grab a salad?" she asked. Leaning against my cubicle wall, "You look like you just saw a ghost. I need to show you something." I said, "Not here." We went to a small deli 2 blocks away. We sat in a booth in the back, away from the lunch rush. I didn't order food. I just put the stack of papers on the table between us. "What is this?" Tessa asked, pulling a fork out of her plastic wrapper. "Just look at the highlighted lines," I said. Tessa chewed on a cucumber slice as she read. Her chewing slowed. Then it stopped. She put the fork down. "Abby," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Is this what I think it is? My grandfather left me a trust," I said, my voice shaking. "My parents are the trustees. They told me it was gone. They told me the market ate it." She pointed a manicured fingernail at the entry for Brookfield Auto Mall. "Did they buy a car?" she asked. "They bought Emily a Civic," I said. 2 weeks ago." Tessa slammed her hand on the table. The salt shaker jumped. "No," she hissed. "Absolutely not. That is illegal. Abby, that is straight-up embezzlement. They are my parents," I whispered. "The defense automatic, ingrained in me since childhood. I don't care if they are the Pope and the Queen of England." Tessa said, her eyes blazing. "Theft is theft. They can't just steal from you because you are their kid. That money has your name on it. Look right here. Beneficiary, Abigail Jackson, not Mark and Linda's slush fund." She flipped back to the large withdrawals from 2 years ago. "And where did this $100,000 go?" she asked. "Did they buy a boat?" "I don't know," I said. "I have no idea." "You need a lawyer," Tessa said firmly. "Like, yesterday. I can't sue my parents. Tessa, it would destroy the family." "Your family is already destroyed," she said, leaning forward. "They destroyed it when they treated your inheritance like a piggy bank. You are just the only one who didn't know it yet." Her words stung, but they had the ring of truth. I looked at the papers again. The numbers were black and white, indifferent to my feelings. Tessa reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Abby, look at me. You drive a car that sounds like a lawnmower. You eat ramen 3 nights a week. You stress about rent. And they are driving around in 20 grand of your money? You have to fight this." I took the afternoon off. I couldn't go back to the office and pretend to care about website widgets. Instead, I drove to Willow Ridge. I needed to see Eleanor. I needed to be near the one person in my family who hadn't betrayed me. But as I walked down the hall to her room, a new fear gripped me. If I told her, it would kill her. She was frail, holding on to life by a thread. If she knew that Mark and Linda, her daughter and son-in-law, had desecrated Arthur's legacy, the shock might be the final blow. I composed my face before I entered the room. Eleanor was awake, watching a game show on the television with the volume turned low. When she saw me, her face lit up, but then her expression shifted. She squinted at me. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing," I lied, kissing her cheek. Her skin felt like dry tissue paper. "I just had a headache and decided to leave work early. Thought I would come sit with you. You are a terrible liar." "Abigail," she said softly, "you have the same look your mother gets when she is trying to hide a credit card bill. You look guilty." I sat in the chair, clutching my purse against my stomach as if it were a shield. The trust documents were inside, burning a hole through the leather. "I am just tired. Grandma," I said, "work is stressful. And I saw Emily's new car. It is really nice." Eleanor sighed. A long, rattling sound. "Yes, Linda told me. She said Mark got a bonus." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. "A bonus. That is what they said," I managed to say. Eleanor turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were watery but intense. "Arthur and I never wanted you to struggle," she said. "I know. Grandma, we saved for 40 years, she continued, her voice drifting into memory. "We didn't take vacations. We drove our cars until the wheels fell off. Arthur used to say, Eleanor, this money isn't for us. It is for the girl. So she never has to stay in a job she hates. So she never feels trapped by money the way your mother did growing up. The word trapped hung in the air. My mother, Linda, had married Mark Young. They had always struggled, always been chasing the next paycheck. I knew my grandfather had wanted to break that cycle for me. You are not trapped, are you? Abby, she asked, her eyes searching mine. I forced a smile. No, Grandma, I am fine. I am the steady one, remember? She patted my hand, but she didn't look convinced. There was a shadow in her eyes, a flicker of intuition that terrified me. I stayed for an hour, but the silence between us was heavy. I was withholding the truth, and it felt like another form of betrayal. When I kissed her goodbye, she held my hand a second longer than usual. Be careful, she whispered. I didn't know if she meant on the road or in life. I went home and made coffee. Strong, black coffee. I spread the papers out on my kitchen table. I needed to understand the timeline. 2 years ago, the big withdrawals. I searched my memory. What happened 2 years ago? That was the year Mark had tried to launch that franchise. Burger Barn. He had talked about it for months. He had said he had investors. He had said he was finally going to be his own boss. The business had folded in 6 months. He had never mentioned where the capital came from. He had just said the investors pulled out. I looked at the withdrawals again. 30,000, 45,000. He was the investor. Or rather, I was. But how? I grabbed the folder from my childhood box again. I read the trust deed more carefully. Trustees shall not invade the principal for any purpose other than education or medical emergency without court approval. Court approval. I went to my laptop. I navigated to the county probate court's public records search. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my own last name twice. I searched for Mark Jackson. A list of results popped up. Traffic tickets, a small claims issue from a contractor dispute 10 years ago, and one probate filing from 3 years ago. In re, the Trust of Abigail Marie Jackson. Petition for modification. I clicked on the PDF icon. It cost $2 to download. I entered my debit card information. The document opened. It was a petition signed by Mark and Linda Jackson. They were asking the court to modify the terms of the trust to allow for discretionary distributions for family investment purposes. I scrolled down to the justification section. The beneficiary, Abigail Jackson, has completed her education and is currently gainfully employed with a high earning potential. The reserved funds are no longer critical for her maintenance. The trustees seek to utilize the funds to secure family assets that will ultimately benefit the beneficiary. High earning potential. I stared at the words. At the time this was filed, I was making $38,000 a year. I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. I was deferring my student loans because I couldn't afford the minimum payments. They had lied. They had told a judge I was rich, or rich enough, so they could raid the vault, and the judge, seeing no objection, because I had never been notified, had signed it. Petition approved. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. This wasn't just stealing. This was calculated. This was a legal maneuver designed to strip me of my protection. They had walked into a courtroom, sworn an oath, and erased my future. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the Florida-shaped stain. Plotting. The next morning, I called in sick. I couldn't face the spreadsheets. I looked up lawyers. I didn't want a big firm. I couldn't afford a retainer that cost more than my car. I found a name on a legal aid forum, Daniel Pierce. The reviews said he was gruff but effective and hates bullies. His office was downtown, above a coffee shop called The Daily Grind. The staircase smelled of roasted beans and old carpet. I walked in without an appointment. The receptionist was a young man with headphones around his neck. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Mr. Pierce," I said. "It is about a trust and fraud." Daniel Pierce came out of his office 5 minutes later. He was a man in his 50s, wearing a rumpled suit and a tie that was slightly askew. He looked like he slept 3 hours a night. "You the one with the trust fraud?" he asked. "Yes. Come on in." I sat in a leather chair that had a tear in the armrest. I laid everything out: the original trust, the statements, the court petition I had downloaded. Daniel put on a pair of reading glasses and went through the stack. He didn't speak for 10 minutes. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the distant hiss of the espresso machine downstairs. Finally, he looked up over his glasses. "This is ugly," he said. "How ugly?" I asked. "Breach of fiduciary duty is the headline," he said, leaning back. "But this petition, this is bordering on perjury. If they knowingly misrepresented your financial status to the court to get access to the funds, that is fraud. Can I get it back?" I asked, my voice small. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That depends." "Is the money gone?" "Most of it," I said. "Then you are suing for assets," he said. "You can get a judgment." "Sure. But if they spent it on failed businesses and cars, you can't get blood from a stone. We would have to go after their house, their retirement accounts." He looked me dead in the eye. "Listen to me. Ms. Jackson, I can win this case. The paper trail is a 4-lane highway. But if you pull this trigger, you are nuking the bridge. There is no going back. This means depositions. It means dragging your parents into a courtroom and calling them thieves on public record. It means no more pretending everything is fine at Thanksgiving." I looked at the papers. I thought about the pearl white Civic. I thought about Eleanor's words. "Don't let them make you feel small. I don't care about Thanksgiving." I said. Daniel nodded. He pulled a retainer agreement out of his drawer. "I will take this on contingency. I don't get paid unless we recover something. But you need to be sure." "I am sure," I said. I signed the paper. I drove home feeling lighter, but also terrified. I had just launched a missile at my own family. I was heating up a can of soup for dinner when my phone rang. It was Mark. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button. But a morbid curiosity took over. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear him sound normal while I knew what he was. "Hello?" I answered. "Hey, Abby. It's Dad." "Hi. Dad, listen. Your mom and I are sitting here looking at some paperwork. We are trying to consolidate some bills. You know, get things organized." "Okay," I said, stirring the soup. "We were wondering—" Mark paused, clearing his throat. "Since your credit score is so good, Mom says it is over 750, right? We were wondering if you could co-sign on a small personal loan for us, just to clear up some high-interest cards." I froze. The spoon clattered against the side of the pot. "You want me to co-sign a loan?" I asked. "Just 10,000, he said quickly. "We would pay it. Obviously. It is just that with the rates right now, our score isn't getting us the best deal. It would really help us out. Just a little help for the family." The audacity of it took my breath away. They had drained $160,000 of my money. They had bought my sister a car with the dregs, and now they wanted to use my credit, the only financial asset I had managed to build despite their sabotage, to dig themselves out of the hole they created. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource, a line of credit, a piggy bank that they could smash open whenever they needed something. "Abby? Are you there?" "I am here. Dad," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "So, what do you think?" "It is just a signature. I can't right now." "Dad," I said, "I have to go. Come on. Abby, don't be like that. We really need this." I said I have to go. I hung up. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the phone tight in my hand. The anger that had been simmering for days finally boiled over. It wasn't a hot, screaming anger anymore. It was cold. It was hard. It was a diamond bullet. I wasn't going to co-sign a loan. I was going to Sunday dinner, and I was going to bring the receipts. I walked over to the trash can and scraped the unheated soup into the bin. I wasn't hungry. I had work to do. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat of my car like a loaded weapon. I had spent the morning staring at it, drinking coffee that tasted like battery acid. Rehearsing the lines, I would say. I had played out the scenario in my head a dozen times. In some versions, my parents broke down and begged for forgiveness. In others, they coldly denied it. But in every version, The silence that had suffocated our family for years was finally broken. I drove to their house at 4 o'clock. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with clouds that promised snow but never delivered. When I pulled into the driveway, the pearl-white Civic was there, gleaming mockingly. My stomach gave a hard, violent twist. I grabbed the folder. I didn't put it in my bag this time. I carried it in my hand, exposed. Walking up the driveway, I felt a strange detachment. It was the feeling of walking onto a stage, or perhaps walking toward a cliff edge. I wasn't the daughter coming home for Sunday roast anymore. I was the plaintiff. The house smelled of garlic and roasting meat. It was a smell that used to mean safety, but now it just smelled like a lie. I walked in. Emily was in the living room, laughing at something on the TV. She looked up, her face bright and unburdened. "Hey, Abby," she chirped. "Mom made lasagna, the good kind with the bechamel." "Hi, Em," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. I walked past her into the kitchen. Linda was at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. Mark was at the table, reading the Sunday paper. "Hello, everyone," I said. Linda turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hi, honey, you are right on time. Grab the salad out of the fridge, will you?" I didn't move toward the fridge. I walked to the table and sat down across from my father. I placed the folder on the placemat in front of me. Mark glanced at it, then at me. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of wariness crossing his face before he masked it with a grin. "What is that? Work stuff? You work too hard. Abby, even on Sundays." We ate. I forced myself to chew. The lasagna was rich and creamy, but it felt like wet cement in my mouth. I waited. I waited through the small talk about the weather. I waited through Linda's monologue about the neighbor's new fence. Then, the spotlight turned to Emily. "So, doctor, Evans told me I have the best bedside manner in the cohort," Emily said, beaming. "He said I am a natural." "That is my girl," Mark said, raising his glass of iced tea. "You have got the touch. Em, you are going to be the best nurse in the state. We are so proud of you," Linda added, her eyes misty. "You have worked so hard." "It is easier now that I don't have to worry about the commute," Emily said, glancing at me. "Having a reliable car changes everything. I can just focus on the patients." Mark nodded vigorously. "Exactly. You need the right tools to succeed." I put my fork down. The metal clattered against the china. A sharp sound that cut through the warmth of the room. "The right tools." I repeated. Everyone looked at me. "Is something wrong?" "Abby?" Linda asked, her brow furrowing. "You have barely touched your food." I reached for the folder. I opened it. I took out the stack of papers, heavily highlighted in neon yellow, and fanned them out on the table next to the salad bowl. "I don't think Emily knows," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Knows what?" Emily asked, looking between us. "I think she thinks you bought that car with your savings," I said, looking directly at Mark. "Or maybe a bonus. That is what you told Grandma, right?" "A bonus?" Mark's jaw tightened. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. "Abby, put that away," he said, his voice dropping to a warning growl. "We are eating dinner." I looked at the top paper. It was the copy of the cashier's check. "Brookfield Auto Mall," I read aloud. $22,500. Dated 3 weeks ago. I looked up at Emily. "It didn't come from a bonus." "Em, it came from account number 4099 at Horizon First Credit Union, the Abigail Jackson Inheritance Trust." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Emily looked at the paper, then at Mark. "What is she talking about? Dad?" Mark slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "That is enough. Abigail," he shouted. "You come into this house, eat my food, and start throwing accusations around?" "I am not throwing accusations," I said, my voice rising to meet his. "I am stating facts. I have the bank statements. Dad, I have the withdrawal history. I know you emptied the trust. I know about the petition you filed 3 years ago claiming I was rich so you could get access to the principal." Linda let out a sharp cry, pressing her hands to her mouth. Oh, God. Abby. Please. Why? I asked, looking at Linda. Why is my trust empty? That money was for my future. Grandpa left it for me, specifically for me. And you spent it on a Civic? We spent it on this family, Mark roared. He stood up, looming over the table. Do you have any idea what it costs to keep this house running? To put food on this table? To raise 2 daughters? So you stole it? I asked. It is not stealing, Mark yelled. It is reimbursement. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on you over the years. Braces, dance lessons, clothes, college tuition. That trust was just a way to balance the books. It all comes out of the same pot in the end. It does not come out of the same pot, I screamed, standing up too. My legs were shaking, but I didn't care. That was a legal trust. It was a fiduciary obligation. You went to a judge and lied. You told them I had high earning potential so you could drain it. I pointed at Emily. You bought her a car with my money. Dad, while I'm driving a wreck that stalls at every light, while I am drowning in $40,000 of student loans that you said you couldn't help with, Emily stood up slowly. She looked pale. Dad? She asked, her voice trembling. Is that true? Did you take the money from Abby's trust? Mark turned to her, his expression softening instantly into something pleading. Emily, honey, listen, it is complicated. We needed the money, and you needed the car. Abby doesn't need it. She has a job. She is established. Emily looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of horror and sudden, defensive anger. I didn't know. She said to me, I swear, Abby, I thought, they told me it was a dealership promotion and some savings. Well, now you know, I said coldly. You are driving my inheritance. Emily's face crumbled, but then it hardened. She crossed her arms. Why are you doing this right now? She demanded. Why are you trying to make me feel guilty? I finally get something nice, finally get a break, and you have to ruin it? You are just jealous because Dad helped me. Jealous? I laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. Emily, he didn't help you. He stole from me to buy your affection. There is a difference. Linda began to sob loudly. We did what any parents would do, she wailed. We were drowning. Abby, the bills were piling up. We just wanted to give you girls a good life. We didn't want you to know how bad it was. You didn't want us to know you were failures, I said, the words tasting bitter. So you became thieves instead. Mark's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. You ungrateful little brat, he spat. You are obsessed with money. That is all you care about. Money, 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 just like your grandfather. You think you are so special because you have a trust fund? If you hadn't taken so long finishing college, if you hadn't wasted time switching majors, maybe we wouldn't have been so strained. I stared at him. I had switched majors once. It had added 1 semester. You are blaming me? I asked, incredulous. You are blaming me for you emptying my account? I am blaming you for being selfish, Mark shouted. You act like we lived in luxury. We used that money to survive. I looked down at the highlighted statements. Brookfield Auto Mall is not survival. Mark, it wasn't just the car, he blurted out. The room went quiet again. Even Linda stopped crying for a second. What? I asked. Mark was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked like a cornered animal, lashing out blindly. It wasn't just the car, he said, his voice dropping to a rough mutter. We used it for the business. What business? Emily asked. The franchise, Mark yelled, throwing his hands up. Burger Barn. 5 years ago. I needed capital for the buy-in. I needed liquid assets to show the bank. I used the trust to cover the initial fees and the lease deposit. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Burger Barn, the venture he had talked about endlessly, the one that had closed its doors after 6 months of mismanagement and bad location choices. You used my trust for Burger Barn? I whispered. I was going to pay it back, Mark insisted, his eyes wild. It was an investment. If it had taken off, I would have doubled the money. I would have put it all back plus interest. It was a sure thing. Abby, it was supposed to be our ticket out, but it failed. I said, "Yeah, it failed," he snapped. "Because the economy went to hell and the suppliers screwed me. It wasn't my fault, but I did it for us, for the family. And you stand there judging me? You have no idea what it takes to be a man in this world." I looked at the statement again, the withdrawals from 2 years ago, 30,000, 45,000, that wasn't for the family. I said, my voice trembling with a new, colder rage. "That was for your ego. You gambled my future on a burger joint. You lost. And then, when there was just a scrap left, you spent the rest on a car for Emily so you could pretend to be the big man one last time. Get out," Mark said. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out of my house. If you're going to talk to your father like that, you can get the hell out." I grabbed the papers from the table. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped them. "I am going," I said, "and don't worry, I won't be back for Thanksgiving." I walked out. I heard Linda wailing my name, heard Emily asking Mark if it was true about the business, but I didn't look back. I slammed the front door, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I got into my car. I tried to put the key in the ignition, but my hand was spasming. I had to grip my wrist with my other hand to steady it. Finally, the engine roared to life. I backed out of the driveway, scraping the bottom of my bumper on the curb, and sped away. I couldn't go home. My apartment was too quiet, too full of the empty space where my future was supposed to be. I needed somewhere safe. I drove to Willow Ridge. It was 7 o'clock by the time I parked. The visiting hours were technically over, but the night nurse, Megan, knew me. She saw my face, red, blotchy, terrified, and buzzed me in without a word. I walked down the hallway. The hospice was silent. A stark contrast to the screaming chaos I had just left. The air smelled of lavender and inevitability. I pushed open the door to room 304. Eleanor was awake. She was lying flat on her back, staring at the ceiling. When I entered, she turned her head slowly. "Abigail?" she whispered. I walked to the side of the bed and collapsed into the chair. I didn't mean to cry. I wanted to be strong for her, but as soon as I sat down, as soon as I saw the kindness in her tired eyes, the dam broke. I put my head on the mattress, burying my face in the sheets near her hand, and sobbed. I cried for the money. I cried for the house I would never buy. I cried for the sister I had lost, and the parents I realized I never really had. Eleanor didn't shush me. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She just rested her hand on my hair, her fingers light as dried leaves, and let me weep. When the storm finally passed, I sat up, wiping my face with my sleeve. I felt hollowed out. "I am so sorry. Grandma," I hiccuped. "I shouldn't be doing this here. You don't need this. Tell me," she said. Her voice was stronger than it had been in days, steel beneath the silk. I told her everything. I told her about the statements. I told her about the car check. I told her about the confrontation at dinner. I told her about Burger Barn. "Mark used the money for a franchise?" she asked. Her eyes were sharp, focused on mine. "Yes," I said. "He admitted it. He said he was going to pay it back." "And the petition?" she asked. "You mentioned a petition." I pulled the crumbled paper out of my pocket. I smoothed it out on the bedspread. "They filed it 3 years ago." I said, "They told the court I didn't need the money. They said I had high earning potential." Eleanor reached for her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her hand shook, but she managed to put them on. She took the paper from me. She read it in silence. Her lips moved slightly as she parsed the legal language. I watched her face. I saw the sadness there. But underneath it, I saw something else. I saw fury. It was a cold, hard fury that tightened the skin around her mouth. "He promised," she whispered. She let the paper drop to her lap. She looked at the wall, her eyes unfocused. "The night Arthur died," she said, her voice clear and low. "Mark sat in our kitchen. He held my hands. He promised Arthur that he would treat that trust like a sacred object. He promised he would never touch the principal without your consent. She looked back at me. He looked me in the eye and lied to a grieving widow. It is gone, Grandma, I said. It is all gone. Eleanor closed her eyes. A single tear tracked through the map of wrinkles on her cheek. I failed you. Abigail. No, I said quickly, grabbing her hand. No, you didn't. This isn't your fault. It is, she insisted. I knew what they were like. I knew Linda couldn't say no to Mark, and I knew Mark always thought he was one lucky break away from being a millionaire. Arthur knew it too. That is why he set up the trust. But we made a mistake. We made them the trustees because we thought family would protect family. She took a ragged breath. I should have checked. I should have asked for the statements years ago. I didn't want the conflict. I didn't want to be the nagging mother-in-law. I prioritized my peace over your protection. Grandma, please, I said, you couldn't have known they would go to court. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. Margaret Sloane, she said. Who? Margaret Sloane. She is the attorney who handled Arthur's estate. She has an office on Elm Street. I nodded. Okay, there is a letter. Eleanor said, A letter? From your grandfather. She shifted, trying to sit up higher. I helped her adjust the pillows. Arthur wrote a letter to you, she explained. It is sealed in his file at Margaret's office. He instructed that it be given to you on your 35th birthday, along with the release of the trust principal. She gripped my hand tight. Her grip was surprisingly strong. He wanted to explain why he did it, why he skipped your mother and left it to you. He wanted you to know that he believed in you, that he saw how steady you were, even when you were a teenager. I felt a fresh wave of tears prick my eyes. Grandpa Arthur had seen me. You need that letter. Abigail, Eleanor said, and you need Margaret. She drafted the original trust. She will know if that petition was legal. She will know if they committed fraud. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. She coughed, a dry hacking sound that racked her small body. I reached for the water cup, but she waved it away. She looked at me, and her expression was terrifyingly lucid. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know. I admitted. Do you want them to get away with it? I looked at her. I thought about Mark's face, red and screaming. You ungrateful little brat. I thought about Linda, crying to manipulate the narrative. I thought about Emily, driving that car, innocent but complicit. No, I said. Then we fight, Eleanor said. She pointed to the phone on the bedside table. Hand me the phone, Abigail. Grandma, it is late. You should rest. I will rest when I'm dead, she snapped. And considering where I am, that won't be long. Hand me the phone. I gave it to her. She didn't dial immediately. She held the receiver against her chest, closing her eyes for a moment to gather her strength. I have spent the last 10 years trying to keep the peace, she said softly. I have bitten my tongue when Mark made foolish decisions. I have looked the other way when Linda complained about money she didn't earn. I thought that was what love was, keeping the boat steady. She opened her eyes and looked at me. But love isn't letting people be wolves. Abigail, love is protecting the sheep. She lifted the receiver. I am going to fix what I can, she said, before the clock runs out. She looked at me, waiting. Tomorrow morning, she said. Bring your laptop and bring coffee. We have work to do. I nodded, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was something harder. It was resolve. I sat there as she put the phone back in the cradle, deciding to wait until business hours. But the intention hung in the room like a physical presence. The fragility was gone from her face. She looked like the woman who had raised a family, buried a husband, and was now preparing for one last battle. She was Eleanor Hayes, and she was on my side. Go home, Abigail, she said gently. Lock your door. Sleep. Tomorrow. We call Margaret. I kissed her forehead. It was cool. I love you. Grandma, I love you. Honey, now go. I walked out of the hospice center into the biting cold of the night. The wind cut through my coat, but I didn't feel it. I got into my car. I looked at the passenger seat. The folder was still there. messy and chaotic. I picked it up and put it in the glove box. I locked it. I drove home. I didn't cry. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, the white lines of the road stretching out ahead of me, leading to a tomorrow that was going to change everything. The morning sun that filtered through the blinds of room 304 was pale and watery, offering no real warmth against the November chill pressing against the glass. I had slept in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, my neck stiff and my mouth tasting of stale coffee. But I was wide awake. I watched Eleanor. She was sitting up in bed, propped against a fortress of white pillows. Her breathing was shallow, a rhythmic, raspy sound that I had monitored all night, terrified it would stop. But her eyes were open, and they were clear. The hazel irises, usually clouded by pain medication and exhaustion, held a sharpness I hadn't seen in months. It was the look she used to get when she was balancing her checkbook or debating a contractor about the price of roofing tiles. "Abigail," she said. Her voice was thin, like paper, but the tremor was gone. "I am here, Grandma," I said, leaning forward. "Do you need water? Do you need Megan?" "I need the phone," she said, "and I need yours, too." I hesitated. "Grandma, it is 7:30 in the morning. I know what time it is," she snapped gently, "and I know how much time I have left. It is not enough to waste on politeness." I stood up and handed her the beige receiver of the room's landline. Then I unlocked my smartphone and placed it on the rolling table tray within her reach. She looked at the devices as if they were weapons she was inspecting before a duel. "I am going to fix what I can before the clock runs out," she said, her gaze shifting to me. "Even if it upsets everyone, even if it burns the whole house down, are you ready for that?" I thought about the empty trust account. I thought about Mark's purple-faced screaming match in the kitchen. I thought about the pearl-white Civic parked in the driveway, a monument to my stolen future. "I am ready," I said. "Good." She picked up the landline. Her fingers were bony, the skin translucent, but she dialed the number from memory. "Margaret," she said into the receiver. "It is Eleanor Hayes. No, I am fine. Well, I am dying, but otherwise, I am fine. Listen to me. I need you to pull Arthur's file. Yes, the whole thing, and the trust documents for Abigail." She listened for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "I know it is early, but this is an emergency. Mark and Linda have emptied the account." She said it so matter-of-factly, as if she were reporting a leaky faucet. I watched her face, marveling at her composure. This was the woman who had taught me how to prune roses, how to bake biscuits, and now she was teaching me how to go to war. She waited, listening to Margaret on the other end. "I want you to look for any petitions filed in the last 5 years," Eleanor continued. "Specifically a petition for modification. They claimed Abigail didn't need the money. Yes. I want to know exactly what authority they had to drain the funds." She paused, then handed the phone to me. "She wants to talk to you. Put it on speaker." I pressed the button and set the phone down on the plastic tray. "Abigail?" Margaret Sloane's voice was crisp and professional, cutting through the static. "I haven't seen you since you were a teenager. I am so sorry we are speaking under these circumstances." "Hi, Ms. Sloane," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Eleanor tells me there was a modification." Margaret said, "Do you have the paperwork?" "I have a copy I downloaded from the court website." I said, "It says the petition was approved 3 years ago. It says the funds could be used for family investments because I had high earning potential." "Read me the clerk's notes at the bottom," Margaret commanded. "The order section." I pulled the crumbled paper from my bag, smoothing it out on the bedspread. It says, "Petition approved subject to annual accounting filed with the court and provided to the beneficiary commencing January 1st of the following year." The line went silent for a long beat. "Did you receive an accounting?" Margaret asked. "Did you receive a report in January of last year? Or the year before?" "No," I said. "I never received anything. I didn't even know the trust was modified until 2 days ago. That is it." "Then?" Margaret said, her voice dropping into a tone of grim satisfaction. "That is the breach. The court gave them permission to invest conditional on them keeping you informed. If they failed to provide the accounting, the modification might be voidable, and if they spent the money on consumer goods, like a car, instead of the investments they promised the court. That is fraud. Eleanor leaned toward the phone. Margaret, she said, I want you to come here. Today, Eleanor. I have a full schedule. Cancel it, Eleanor said. I need to update my will. And I need you to bring Arthur's letters, the ones he left in the safe deposit box. There was a pause. You want the letters for Abigail? Margaret asked softly. I want no ambiguity, Eleanor said firmly. I want everything on the table. Bring the notary. Bring the paralegal. I don't know if I will be coherent tomorrow. It has to be today. I will be there at 2:00. Margaret promised. As Eleanor hung up the phone, I heard a soft rustle at the door. I turned to see Megan, the morning shift nurse, standing in the doorway with a medication cart. She was a young woman with kind eyes and purple scrubs. She had been listening. I expected her to scold us for the stress, to tell Grandma to rest. Instead, she walked over to the computer terminal mounted on the wall. I am just going to make a note in your chart. Eleanor, Megan said quietly, typing as she spoke. What kind of note? I asked, feeling defensive. A note stating that the patient is alert, oriented to person, place, and time, and is directing her own medical and legal care. Megan said without looking up. She turned to us and offered a small, conspiratorial smile. Just in case anyone tries to claim later that you were coerced or confused, it happens more than you think in these situations. The grieving family suddenly decides Grandma wasn't in her right mind when she changed the will. I stared at her, stunned by the foresight. Thank you. Megan, Eleanor said, bowing her head slightly. Megan checked Eleanor's vitals, adjusted her oxygen cannula, and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Eleanor didn't rest. She pointed to the phone again. One more call, she said. Who? I asked. The bank. Horizon. Margaret suggested it. If we don't flag the account, they could drain whatever is left before the lawyers get involved. I dialed the number for the trust department at Horizon First Credit Union. I navigated the menu until I got a human being. I handed the phone to Eleanor. This is Eleanor Hayes, she said. I am the grantor's widow. I am calling regarding the Hayes-Jackson Trust, account ending in 4099. She listened, then cut the person off. I don't care about the privacy policy right now. I am instructing you to freeze the account for review. There is an active investigation into trustee misconduct. You will be receiving a subpoena from Daniel Pierce's office later today. I suggest you cooperate with him unless you want the credit union to be named as a co-defendant for negligence. She hung up. She sank back into the pillows. Her face suddenly very gray. The energy required to make those calls had drained her battery. Grandma, I said, panic rising in my throat. You need to sleep. I will rest in a minute, she whispered, closing her eyes. I just needed to start the fire. We sat in silence for the next few hours. I read a magazine without seeing the words. Eleanor dozed, waking up periodically to sip water. The room felt like the eye of a storm, calm, but with the pressure dropping rapidly. At noon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. We need to talk. Mom is a wreck. You are tearing this family apart. I didn't reply. Then, 10 minutes later, another text. Did you call Margaret Sloan? And another, why is she asking for records? Abby, what did you do? I put the phone on silent and turned it face down. They knew. Margaret had called them. The machinery was moving. At 1:30, the piece was shattered. I heard them before I saw them. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. My mother's high-pitched, frantic voice. Mark's booming baritone. You can't just go in there. A nurse, not Megan, was saying. Watch me, Mark shouted. The door to room 304 flew open. Mark and Linda stood there. Mark looked like he had run a marathon. His face was slick with sweat, his hair wild. Linda was clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes red and swollen. They looked at me, sitting by the bed, and then at Eleanor. "Mother!" Linda cried, rushing to the bedside. "Oh my God! Look at her! She is exhausted!" She turned on me, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "What are you doing to her?" Linda screamed. "She is dying! Abby! And you are in here stressing her out with legal nonsense? You are manipulating a dying woman for money." Mark stepped forward, pointing a finger at me. "You called Margaret, didn't you?" he demanded. "You told her to audit us?" I stood up, putting myself between him and the bed. "I didn't tell her anything," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "Grandma did. That is a lie," Mark yelled. "Look at her. She is half comatose. She doesn't know what day it is. You put her up to this. You whispered poison in her ear because you are mad about the car." He looked at Eleanor, who had opened her eyes and was watching them with a detached, eerie calm. "Eleanor, listen to me," Mark said, his voice changing to a patronizing, loud, slow talk, as if he were addressing a toddler. "Abby is confused. We are handling everything. You don't need to worry about the trust. You just need to rest. You are not well enough to be making legal decisions right now." He reached out to pat her hand. Eleanor pulled her hand away sharply. "Do not touch me, Mark." Her voice was not loud, but it stopped him cold. She pushed herself up on her elbows. I tried to help her, but she waved me off. She wanted to do this under her own power. She looked at him, her gaze traveling from his scuffed boots to his red, angry face. "Today is Tuesday, November 14th, 2025, she said clearly. "The president is sitting in the Oval Office. I am in room 304 of Willow Ridge Hospice. And you, Mark Jackson, are a liar and a thief." Mark recoiled, as if she had slapped him. "Eleanor," he stammered. "November 12th, 1998, she continued, reciting the date like a litany. "That was the day Arthur signed the trust. You sat at our kitchen table. You ate my blueberry pie. And Arthur asked you, he asked you specifically, if you understood that the principal was to remain untouched until Abigail was 35. She took a breath, a ragged whistling sound. You looked him in the eye. "Mark, you said, 'I promise, Arthur, I will treat it like it is my own soul. I will never touch the principal without Abigail's written consent.'" The room was deadly silent. The hum of the oxygen machine seemed to roar. "Did you get her consent, Mark?" Eleanor asked. "Did you get her written consent when you bought a car? Did you get it when you threw $50,000 into a hamburger stand?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Linda, desperate for backup, but Linda was staring at the floor, sobbing quietly. It was implicit," Mark muttered finally, his voice stripping gears. "We are her parents. We know what is best." "No," Eleanor said. "You know what is best for you. You have always known what is best for you." She pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Margaret Sloane will be here in 20 minutes. Mark's head snapped up. "Margaret is coming here?" "Yes," Eleanor said, "and I am rewriting my will." Linda let out a wail. "Mother, no, you can't. I can, and I will," Eleanor said. She looked at both of them with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. "I am leaving the majority of my estate to Abigail," she declared. Mark's face went from red to white. "You can't do that. We have a mortgage. Eleanor, we have debt. You promised to help us." "I promised to help family," Eleanor said. "I didn't promise to fund a criminal defense." She leaned back against the pillows, her strength waning. But she kept her eyes locked on them. "Here is how it is going to work," she said. "Whatever you have taken from Abigail's trust, every single penny, every withdrawal, every fee will be calculated, and that amount will be treated as an advance against your inheritance." She paused to let the words sink in. "If you took $200,000 from her, that is $200,000 you will not see from me. If the math shows you took more than your share, then you get nothing." "Nothing?" Mark whispered. "Nothing," she confirmed. "You spent your inheritance early, Mark. You just didn't realize it at the time. But "That is not fair," Mark shouted, the panic fully setting in. "That money is gone. We can't pay it back. If you cut us out, we will lose the house. Then you should have thought of that before you went car shopping with a stolen checkbook," Eleanor said. She closed her eyes. "Get out," she whispered. "I need to save my voice for the lawyer." Mark stood there, vibrating with rage. He looked at me. His eyes were full of hate, a deep, burning resentment that terrified me. "You did this," he hissed at me. "You poisoned her. I hope you are happy. You destroyed this family over money. I didn't destroy it." "Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I just turned on the lights. Come on." "Mark," Linda sobbed, tugging on his arm. "Let's go. Please, let's just go." Mark allowed himself to be pulled away at the doorway. He looked back one last time, not at Eleanor, but at me. It was a look that promised retribution. When the door clicked shut, the silence rushed back in. Eleanor let out a long, shuddering breath. Her hand fell limp on the sheet. "Are you okay?" I asked, rushing to her side. "No," she whispered. "I am not okay. That was the hardest thing I've ever done." She looked at me, her eyes wet. "I love your mother. Abigail. She is my daughter. Breaking her heart. It feels like breaking my own." "I know," I said, gripping her hand. "I am so sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said fiercely. "Be right." She pointed to the water cup. "Give me a drink, and fix my pillows. Margaret hates it when I look sloppy." 20 minutes later, Margaret Sloane arrived. She was a tall woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than my car. She was accompanied by a young paralegal carrying a briefcase and a notary, public with a stamp. They set up a makeshift office on the rolling tray. "Abigail," Margaret said, looking at me, "I need to ask you to step out into the hall. I need to speak with my client privately to establish intent without any potential beneficiaries present." I nodded. I understood the rules. I walked out into the hallway. I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the wall next to the door. I could hear the murmur of voices inside, Margaret's low, questioning tone, Eleanor's weak but distinct replies. I pulled my knees to my chest. I felt like a child again, listening to the adults decide my fate. Down the hall, near the nurses' station, I saw Mark and Linda. They hadn't left. They were arguing with a man in a suit, their own lawyer, perhaps, or maybe just fighting with each other. Mark was pacing, his hands waving in the air. Linda was sitting on a bench, her head in her hands. They looked small. They looked desperate. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix it for them. I didn't feel the pull to go over there and offer to co-sign a loan, or mediate the argument, or promise to be the steady one. I stayed where I was, inside the room. Eleanor was signing her name. She was rewriting history. She was taking the pen that Mark and Linda had used to erase my future, and she was using it to write a new one. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the hospice. Somewhere, a cart rattled. Somewhere, a phone rang, and inside room 304, the scratch of a pen against paper sounded like the loudest thing in the world. After an hour, the door opened. Margaret beckoned me back in. "It is done," she said. Eleanor looked exhausted, her skin gray, but she was smiling. "Come here. Abigail," she whispered. I went to her. Margaret handed me a thick envelope. "This is from Arthur," Eleanor said. "Open it when you are alone." I took the envelope. It was heavy. "And one more thing," Eleanor said. She looked at Margaret. "Tell her about the car." Margaret cleared her throat. "We have included a specific provision regarding the vehicle purchased with trust funds," she said. "The Honda Civic." I looked up. "What about it?" "The will stipulates that the title for the vehicle must be transferred solely to Mark Jackson," Margaret explained, "and the debt associated with it, if Mark refinances to repay the trust, must be in his name. However, Eleanor has added a condition." "What condition?" I asked. That Emily's use of the vehicle is protected, Margaret said, and that Emily cannot be held financially responsible for the debt or the asset. Mark owns the debt. Emily gets the car. I looked at Eleanor. Confused. Why? Because Mark will try to use it as leverage. Eleanor whispered. He will tell Emily she has to sell it to pay him back. He will tell her it is her fault. I want to cut that string. He stole the money. He buys the debt. But Emily is just a girl who wanted to be a nurse. She shouldn't be collateral damage. I felt a lump in my throat. Even in her anger. Eleanor was thinking about protection. She was protecting Emily from Mark, just as she was protecting me. You are amazing, I said. I am tired, she said. She closed her eyes. I am very, very tired. Margaret packed up her files. We will file this immediately, she said. The old will is revoked. The new one is active as of this moment. She touched my shoulder. Call Daniel Pierce, she said. Tell him I have the documents he needs regarding the accounting failure. We have them on fraud. I nodded. They left. I sat alone with Eleanor as the afternoon light faded into evening. She didn't wake up again to talk. She drifted into a deep sleep, her breathing heavy and labored. I held her hand. I held the envelope from my grandfather, and I waited for the war that was sure to come tomorrow. The air in room 304 had changed. It was no longer the stale, suspended atmosphere of waiting for death. It was charged with the static electricity of a courtroom. Margaret Sloane had returned, just as she promised, and she had brought the cavalry. The cavalry consisted of a petite notary public named Sarah, who looked barely out of college, and a paralegal named David, whose briefcase seemed to contain the weight of the entire legal system. They moved around the small hospice room with respectful efficiency, turning the bedside table into a desk and adjusting the blinds to reduce the glare on the documents. I stood by the window, watching. Nurse Megan was there too, standing near the door with her arms crossed, serving as the medical witness. Another staff member, an orderly named James, stood next to her. We were the jury for Eleanor Hayes's final judgment. Eleanor was sitting up, bolstered by fresh pillows. She wore a silk scarf wrapped around her head to hide the thinning hair. A splash of color against the sterile white of the sheets. She looked regal, despite the IV lines and the oxygen cannula. Are we ready? Eleanor asked, her voice rasping but clear. We are, Margaret said. She opened a leather binder and placed it on the rolling table. I held my breath. This wasn't just paperwork. This was a weapon. Margaret began to read the key provisions aloud, her voice calm and measured. I, Eleanor Marie Hayes, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils. I appoint my granddaughter, Abigail Marie Jackson, as the sole executor of my estate. I saw Megan's eyebrows shoot up slightly. It was a massive responsibility. I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders, heavy and cold. Margaret continued, flipping a page. Article 4. Distribution of residuary estate. I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my residuary estate to my daughter, Linda Jackson, and my son-in-law, Mark Jackson, and my granddaughter, Abigail Jackson, to be divided as follows. She paused, looking over her reading glasses at Eleanor to ensure she was following. Eleanor nodded. However, Margaret read, emphasizing the word, this bequest is subject to a strict equalization clause. Any funds, assets, or principal found to have been misappropriated, withdrawn without beneficiary consent, or otherwise drained from the Abigail Marie Jackson Inheritance Trust by Mark Jackson or Linda Jackson acting as trustees, shall be calculated in full. This total amount, including an imputed interest rate of 5% per annum, shall be treated as an advancement against their share of my estate. The room was silent. I did the math in my head. If they had taken $160,000, plus interest, and if Eleanor's estate, mostly the house and some savings, was worth maybe $400,000, if the total of the advancement exceeds their calculated share, Margaret continued, her voice devoid of pity. Then Mark Jackson and Linda Jackson shall receive nothing, and the entirety of the estate shall pass to Abigail Jackson. It was a total disinheritance disguised as accounting. It was brilliant. It didn't say, "I hate you for stealing." It said, "You already took your money. Now you are done. And there is the matter of the vehicle." Eleanor whispered, "Read that part." Margaret turned to a specific addendum regarding the Honda Civic currently in the possession of Emily Jackson, purchased with funds traceable to the trust. I direct my executor to pursue all legal avenues to refinance the title and loan of said vehicle solely into the name of Mark Jackson. It is my express wish that ownership be structured such that Emily Jackson retains use and possession of the vehicle, free of any financial encumbrance. While the debt obligation remains the sole legal responsibility of Mark Jackson, I stared at my grandmother. She wasn't just punishing Mark, she was surgically removing his leverage. She knew that the moment the pressure got too high, Mark would threaten to take the car away from Emily to hurt her or to sell it for cash. Eleanor had checkmated him from her deathbed. He would have to pay for the car he stole, but he wouldn't be allowed to touch it. Do you understand these provisions? Eleanor? Margaret asked formally. I do, Eleanor said. Is this your free and voluntary act? It is. Sign here, please. Eleanor took the pen. Her hand shook violently. It took her nearly a minute to write her name. The letters were jagged, but they were there. Eleanor M. Hayes, Sarah, the notary, stamped the document with a heavy thud. It is done, Margaret said. Closing the binder, the staff witnesses signed. Margaret packed up her things. Thank you. Margaret, Eleanor said, leaning back, her energy suddenly evaporating. I will file this within the hour. Margaret promised. And Abigail? Yes. Daniel Pierce has the forensic accountant's report. You need to call him. The mediation is scheduled for Tuesday. I nodded. When the room cleared out, it was just me and Eleanor again. The silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was settled. Come here, Abby, Eleanor said. Her voice was barely a whisper. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hand. It felt fragile, like a dried leaf. I am sorry, she said. Grandma, stop. You just fixed everything. I'm sorry I trusted him. She said, her eyes closing. I am sorry I trusted my own daughter to be a mother first and a spendthrift second. I projected my own values onto them. And you paid the price. It is okay. I said, we are handling it. Listen to me, she said, squeezing my fingers with surprising strength. I looked at her. Her eyes were open again, focused on me with an intensity that burned. Do not let this consume you. What do you mean? You are a project manager, she said, a faint smile ghosting her lips. You manage things. You fix things. You are the steady one. But this war with your parents, it can become your whole world if you let it. You can wake up in 10 years and realize you are just a collection of lawsuits and grievances. I don't want to be that. I whispered. Then don't be. She said, fight them. Get what is yours. But remember that the money is just money. The justice is just paper. You deserve a life that is more than cleaning up their messes. You deserve to be Abigail, not just the plaintiff. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. I will try. She patted my hand. Good. Now, let me sleep. I have done enough damage for one day. I kissed her forehead and left the room. I felt armor-plated. I felt like I was carrying a sword, but outside the hospice, the world was still messy. My phone had 3 missed calls from Daniel Pierce. I called him back from the car. We have a date, Daniel said without preamble. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, the mediation center on 4th Street. Are they coming? I asked. They have retained counsel, Daniel said. A guy named Randall Klein. He is a strip mall generalist, mostly divorces and DUIs. But he knows enough to be annoying. He called me this morning. He sounds tired already. What did he say? He said his clients are eager to resolve this misunderstanding within the family. Misunderstanding. I scoffed. That is a hell of a word for grand larceny. Daniel chuckled darkly. Klein knows they are in trouble. I sent over the draft complaint. I cited the petition for modification. I used the word perjury. That usually wakes lawyers up. If they lied to a probate judge about your income to get the money, that is not just a civil tort. That is criminal. Klein is likely telling them right now that if this goes to trial, Mark could be looking at jail time. Good. I said. Tuesday, Daniel repeated. Bring your game face and bring coffee. The coffee at the mediation center tastes like despair. Tuesday morning was gray and weeping with rain. The mediation center was located in a renovated warehouse district, a building of exposed brick and frosted glass that tried to look modern but just felt cold. I met Daniel in the lobby. He was wearing his rumpled suit, but his tie was straight today. He carried a banker's box full of files. Ready? He asked. As I will ever be. We walked into conference room B. It was a windowless room with a long oval table. On one side sat Mark, Linda, Emily, and a man I assumed was Randall Klein. Mark looked terrible. His face was splotchy, his eyes rimmed with red. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders. Linda was wearing black, as if she were already at a funeral, and she was clutching a tissue. Emily sat between them, looking small. She was wearing her nursing scrubs, as if she had come straight from a shift or was planning to run away to one immediately after. She didn't look at me. Randall Klein stood up. He was a man with a comb-over and a weary expression. Mr. Pierce, he said, shaking Daniel's hand. Mrs. Jackson. We sat down. The mediator, a retired judge named Mrs. Gable, sat at the head of the table. She had a kind face but eyes that had seen every variation of human greed. Let us begin, Mrs. Gable said. We are here to see if we can reach a settlement regarding the Hayes-Jackson Trust without the need for litigation. She looked at Randall. Mr. Klein, would you like to open? Randall cleared his throat. He opened a folder. My clients, Mark and Linda Jackson, love their daughter very much. He began. This is a tragic misunderstanding of intent. The funds in question were indeed accessed, but they were used for the collective benefit of the family unit, of which Abigail is a member. He paused, glancing at Mark. However, he continued, to avoid the pain of a public trial. My clients are prepared to offer a repayment plan. I watched Mark. He was staring at the table, his jaw working. What kind of plan? Daniel asked, leaning back in his chair. Randall slid a piece of paper across the table. We propose a principal repayment of $100,000, Randall said, payable over a period of 10 years, with 0 interest. In exchange, Abigail will sign a full release of claims and a non-disclosure agreement to protect the family's reputation. I looked at the paper. 10 years, 0 interest. They want to treat the theft like a 0-interest loan? I asked, my voice cutting through the room. It is a generous offer, Mark snapped. Looking up, we don't have that kind of cash lying around. Abby. We would have to scrape to make those payments. You didn't scrape when you bought the Civic. I said. Mark flushed. We are trying to make this right, Linda cried out. Why do you have to be so cruel? Daniel placed a hand on my arm to silence me. He looked at Randall. Randall, this is insulting. Daniel said calmly, your clients liquidated a trust valued at $162,000. They bought a car. They funded a failed business. And frankly, we don't care about the family reputation. We care about the breach of fiduciary duty. He pulled a file from his box. And we care about the perjury, Daniel added. Randall stiffened. We dispute that characterization. Randall said quickly. Dispute it all you want, Daniel said. But we have the petition. They told the court Abigail was high income. She was making $38,000 a year. That is a material lie. If we take this to court, the judge will refer this to the district attorney. Linda let out a whimper. Mark looked at Randall. You said they wouldn't go to the police, Mark hissed. I said we would try to settle. Randall whispered back harshly. Stop talking. Daniel wasn't finished. We are rejecting the 10-year plan, he said. And before you come back with another lowball offer, you should know that our forensic accountant has completed his preliminary review of the bank records. He pulled out a spreadsheet with color-coded columns. We traced the withdrawals. Daniel said. The car, the Burger Barn franchise fees. But there was another series of transfers. He slid the spreadsheet toward Mark. 5 transfers of $5,000 each, sent to a brokerage account at Vanguard. Mark's face went from red to a sickly gray. We subpoenaed the account details. Daniel said, "The account is in the name of Stephen Jackson." I froze. Stephen was Mark's brother, my uncle. He lived in Arizona. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. "You sent my money to Uncle Steve?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mark didn't answer. He looked like he was about to be sick. "Why?" I demanded. "Why did you send him $25,000? Mark slammed his hand on the table. But there was no power in it this time. "It was for safekeeping," he yelled, but his voice cracked. "I was moving assets. I didn't want it all to be gone if the business failed. I was trying to save something." "By hiding it in your brother's name?" Daniel asked. "That is called concealment of assets. Mark, that is another layer of fraud." Linda turned to Mark. "You sent money to Steve? You told me that money was for the supplier. I was protecting us." Mark shouted at her. The room erupted. Linda was crying. Mark was yelling. Randall was trying to calm them down. I felt a hand on my arm. I looked up. It was Emily. She stood up. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "I need a break," she said. Her voice was thin. She walked out of the room. I looked at Daniel. He nodded. I followed her. Emily was standing in the hallway, leaning against the cold brick wall. She was shaking. "Em?" I said softly. She didn't look at me. She was staring at her hands. "I didn't know about Steve," she whispered. "I know." I said, "And I didn't know about the petition." She said. She turned to face me. There were tears streaming down her cheeks, ruining her makeup. "I knew they liked me better," she said. Her voice broke. "I always knew. I knew they bought me things they didn't buy you. I knew they paid for my phone and my insurance and let you pay your own. I knew it, and I let it happen because it was easier." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, but I thought it was just favoritism. I didn't know it was criminal. I didn't know they were stealing from your future to pay for my present. "It is not your fault." I said. "It is, though," she said. "I took the car. I drove it around. I posted that picture. When Dad believes in your dreams," she let out a bitter laugh. "He didn't believe in my dreams, Abby. He just used my dreams to spend your money." She looked at me, and I saw something shift in her eyes. The golden child was gone. In her place was a young woman realizing her pedestal was built on a sinkhole. "I don't want the car," she said. You need a car for work. Not that one," she said fiercely. "I can't drive it. Every time I touch the steering wheel, I feel like I'm pickpocketing you. It represents theft. I want to give it back." "You can't give it back," I said. "It is a used asset now." "But Grandma?" I hesitated. I hadn't told anyone about the new will yet. "Grandma has a plan for the car." I said, "You keep it. Mark pays for it." Emily shook her head. "I don't want him to pay for it. I don't want anything from him right now." The door to the conference room opened. Randall poked his head out. "We are ready to resume," he said. We walked back in. The atmosphere in the room was heavier than before. Mark was slumped in his chair. Linda was blowing her nose. The mediator, Mrs. Gable, looked at everyone. "I think we need to get creative here," she said. "It is clear that a repayment plan is not going to work. Given the lack of trust," she looked at Daniel. "Mr. Pierce, what is your client's bottom line?" Daniel looked at me. "We had discussed this. We want a lump sum settlement," Daniel said. "We want the $25,000 from the brokerage account returned immediately. We want the equity in their home signed over to secure the rest. We can't sign over the house," Linda shrieked. "Where will we live?" Randall held up a hand. "What if—" Randall hesitated. He looked at Mark. "What if we liquidated the brokerage account immediately? That is $25,000. And what if Mark and Linda agreed to waive their portion of Eleanor Hayes' estate?" I sat up straighter. "We know Eleanor is—" "Declining," Randall said delicately. And we know Mark and Linda are beneficiaries. If they assign their rights to Abigail, that could cover a significant portion of the debt. I looked at Daniel. He raised an eyebrow. That depends on the size of the estate, Daniel said. It is the house, mostly, Mark muttered. It is worth 400. If Mark and Linda waive their share, I would get everything, the house, the savings. It would more than cover the 160,000. It would be a full restitution, paid out of their future inheritance. But there was a catch. They don't know about the new will. I thought they were offering to give up something they had already lost. Eleanor had already written the clause, advancement against inheritance. If I accepted this deal, I would be signing a settlement based on an asset they no longer technically controlled in the way they thought. But if I told them about the will now, the deal would blow up. They would contest the will. They would drag this out for years. If they sign a settlement agreement giving up their rights to the estate now, Daniel said slowly, calculating the angle, it locks it in. Even if they try to contest the will later, this contract would supersede it. It protects the estate from litigation. It was a clean break. Randall looked at Mark and Linda. If you do this, Randall said to them, you avoid the lawsuit. You avoid the perjury investigation. You keep your house. You just lose your inheritance from Eleanor, which, frankly, given the circumstances, seems like a fair trade to stay out of prison. Mark looked at me. His eyes were dull. You would really send me to jail? He asked. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who had stolen from me, the man who had hidden money with his brother while I ate ramen noodles. I would let a judge decide. Dad, I said. He flinched. Fine, Mark said. He sounded defeated. Draw it up. We sign over the brokerage account. We sign over our share of Mom's estate. And we are done. And the NDA? Daniel asked. No NDA, I said. Mark looked up. I won't post it on Facebook, I said, but I am not legally binding myself to silence. I am done keeping your secrets. Mark looked at Randall. Randall shrugged. Take the deal. Mark? The mediator began to type up the points of agreement. The room was quiet, save for the clicking of keys. I looked at Emily. She was staring at the table, twisting a ring on her finger. She looked relieved, but also incredibly sad. Then, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it. It was a text from Margaret Sloan. Abigail, you need to come now. She is declining fast. The doctor says it is a matter of hours. The world stopped. The settlement, the money, the justice. It all suddenly felt very small. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I have to go, I said. We are almost done. Mrs. Gable said, we just need signatures. I can't wait, I said. My grandmother is dying. Mark's head snapped up. Mom? I gathered my things. Daniel, you handle the paperwork, I said. I am going to Willow Ridge. I looked at Mark and Linda. You can come if you want, I said, but if you start a fight, if you say one word about money, I will have the nurses throw you out. I looked at Emily. Come with me. Emily stood up immediately. We ran out of the room, leaving the lawyers and the settlement and the ruins of our family finances behind on the conference table. We drove in separate cars, but we were racing toward the same thing, the end of an era. I gripped the steering wheel, the text message burning in my mind, matter of hours. I wasn't thinking about the trust anymore. I wasn't thinking about the Civic. I was thinking about the woman who had taught me to read, the woman who had held my hand when I cried, the woman who had used her last burst of strength to protect me. Please wait, I whispered to the windshield. Please wait for me. The drive to Willow Ridge was a blur of gray asphalt and wiper blades fighting against a relentless drizzle. I didn't remember parking. I didn't remember walking through the automatic doors. I only remembered the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged, as I hurried down the corridor toward room 304. The door was open. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the bedside table and the glow of the medical monitors. Mark and Linda were there. They stood near the window, two dark shapes against the fading light. When I walked in, they looked up. Mark's eyes were red, his face swollen. Linda was clutching a tissue to her nose. For a second, the hostility of the mediation room hung between us, suspended in the antiseptic air, but then it dissipated, swallowed by the gravity of the woman in the bed. I walked past them without a word. I pulled the chair close to the mattress and sat down. Eleanor looked small. The fierce energy she had summoned to sign the papers was gone, replaced by a fragility that terrified me. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow, uneven rhythm. "Grandma," I whispered, "I am here." Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't open them. I took her hand. It was cold. I stayed there for hours. The afternoon bled into evening, and the evening into the deep quiet of the night. Mark and Linda eventually sat on the small sofa in the corner, speaking in hushed, broken whispers. Emily arrived an hour after me, still wearing her scrubs, her face pale and streaked with tears. She pulled a second chair up beside me, and we sat like sentinels, guarding the gate. I reached into my bag and pulled out a tattered paperback copy of The Secret Garden. It was the book Eleanor had read to me when I was 7, when I had the chicken pox and couldn't stop scratching. I opened it to the middle. "Where you tend a rose, my lad, a thistle cannot grow," I read softly. I read for what felt like an eternity. I read until my voice grew hoarse. I read to fill the silence, to keep the world turning for just a little longer. Around 2 a.m, the rhythm of the room changed. The monitors beeped a little slower. The air felt thinner. Eleanor stirred. She turned her head on the pillow, her eyes opening just a fraction. They found me. They were cloudy, drifting between this world and the next. But there was a spark of recognition. She squeezed my hand. It was a weak pressure, barely a flutter, but I felt it all the way to my core. "Abigail," she breathed. "I am here. Grandma." She took a breath that rattled in her chest. "Don't let them," she whispered. "Don't let them decide who you are." "I promise," I said, choking back a sob. "I promise." She closed her eyes. Her chest rose one last time, held the breath for a long, suspended moment, and then let it go. The monitor let out a long, high-pitched tone that sliced through the room. Linda wailed, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief that made me jump. Mark stood up, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Emily buried her face in the sheets. I didn't move. I just held her hand until the warmth began to fade, staring at the face of the only person who had ever truly fought for me. She was gone. The architect of my defense, the keeper of my history, was gone, and I was left alone in the room with the wolves. The funeral took place 3 days later at a small, nondescript chapel on the edge of town. It was a cold day, the sky the color of a bruise. The service was a surreal performance of family unity. Cousins I hadn't seen in a decade hugged me and murmured condolences. Neighbors shook Mark's hand and told him he was a good son. I watched it all from behind a veil of numbness. Mark and Linda stood at the front of the receiving line. Mark wore a black suit that looked expensive, probably bought on a credit card he couldn't afford. He played the grieving patriarch perfectly, nodding solemnly, accepting comfort. Linda was a tragic figure in black lace, leaning on him for support. They barely looked at me. When we made eye contact, their gazes were flat, hard surfaces. The settlement offer we had abandoned on the table, the waiver of their inheritance, hung between us like a ghost. They knew what was coming. They knew the will had been changed. Even if they didn't know the specifics, they were mourning their mother. Yes, but they were also mourning their financial safety net. After the service, there was a reception in the church hall. Plates of sandwiches with the crusts cut off, lukewarm coffee in styrofoam cups. I got a plate of food I knew I wouldn't eat, and sat at a round table near the back. I sat alone. It was a conscious choice. I wasn't going to sit at the head table with Mark and Linda and pretend we were a functional unit. I wasn't going to play my part in their play anymore. People glanced at me. I could see the whispers moving through the room like a breeze. Why is Abigail sitting by herself? Is there trouble? Then, I saw Emily. She was standing in the buffet line, holding a plate. Mark gestured to her, tapping the empty chair beside him at the head table. He smiled, a tight, commanding smile that said, "Come here, be a good daughter." Emily looked at him. Then she looked at me. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look down. She walked past the head table, past Mark's outstretched hand, past Linda's confused expression. She walked straight to the back of the room and set her plate down next to mine. She pulled out the chair and sat. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." I said, "You didn't have to do that." "I think I did." She said. She picked up a cucumber sandwich. The room noticed. The chatter dipped in volume for a split second. Mark's face turned a mottled red. He stared at us across the expanse of the hall, his hand slowly lowering to the table. It was a public defection. The family front had cracked, and everyone had seen it. We ate in silence for a moment, and then Emily started talking about the time Eleanor took us to the zoo and a goat ate her map. We laughed, quietly. It was a small bubble of warmth in a cold room. Mark and Linda didn't come over. They couldn't. To approach us would be to acknowledge the rift. So they sat there, isolated at the head table, ruling over a kingdom that had already crumbled. The reading of the will happened a week later. Margaret Sloane's office was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather bindings. The air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I sat in a high-backed chair next to Daniel Pierce. Mark and Linda sat on a sofa opposite us, flanked by Randall Klein. Emily sat in a chair by the window. Looking out at the traffic, Margaret sat behind her massive desk. She didn't make small talk. She opened the file Eleanor had signed on her deathbed. "I am going to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Marie Hayes, dated November 14th, 2025. Margaret announced. She began to read. The early sections were standard: bequests of jewelry to nieces, a donation to the local library. Then came the meat of it. Article 4. Margaret read, "I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my residuary estate, including my real property located at 42 Oak Street, to my granddaughter, Abigail Jackson." Mark made a sound like he had been punched in the gut. "What?" he blurted out. Margaret didn't stop. "This bequest is made in recognition of the fact that my daughter, Linda Jackson, and my son-in-law, Mark Jackson, have already received a substantial advancement on their inheritance through the unauthorized depletion of the Abigail Marie Jackson Inheritance Trust." "You can't do that!" Mark shouted, jumping to his feet. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She manipulated her. She was on heavy narcotics." Abigail dragged a lawyer into her deathbed and forced her to sign this. "Sit down, Mr. Jackson," Margaret said. Her voice was ice cold. "I will not sit down," Mark roared. "This is fraud. This is undue influence. My mother would never cut me out. We had an agreement. She promised to help us with the house." He turned to Randall Klein. "Do something. Randall, this is illegal." Randall looked tired. He rubbed his temples. "Mark, please sit down. We discussed this possibility." Margaret waited until Mark sank back onto the sofa. Seething, she continued reading. "I further direct that a sum of $50,000 be placed into a trust for the educational benefit of any future children of my granddaughter, Emily Jackson. This trust shall be administered by an independent trustee, Horizon Trust Services, and under no circumstances shall Mark Jackson or Linda Jackson serve as trustees or have access to said funds." Linda gasped. She put her hand to her mouth. It was a direct slap in the face. Eleanor hadn't just cut them out. She had legally codified her distrust of them as grandparents. "This is vicious." Linda sobbed. "She didn't write this. My mother wasn't vicious." Margaret closed the folder. She anticipated there would be questions regarding her state of mind. Margaret said. She pressed a button on her laptop and turned the screen so it faced the room. A video player opened. There was Eleanor. She was sitting in the hospice bed, wearing her silk scarf. She looked frail. Yes, but her eyes were sharp. "My name is Eleanor Hayes." The video, Eleanor said. It is November 14th. I am making this statement to explain my will. Mark stared at the screen, mesmerized and horrified. I love my daughter, Eleanor continued, but I cannot stand by and watch what has happened to my husband's legacy. Arthur left money to protect Abigail. Mark and Linda stole it. She used the word stole. It hung in the office air, heavy and undeniable. They broke their promise to Arthur, Eleanor said, and so I am balancing the scales. This is not Abigail's doing. This is my doing. I am of sound mind. I am heartbroken, but I am clear. She looked directly into the camera lens. Mark, if you are watching this, you had your chance. You spent it on cars and schemes. Do not blame your daughter for the consequences of your own greed. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the office was absolute. Mark looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 minutes. He slumped back against the cushions, staring at the blank screen. Margaret looked at Randall. We have the medical attestations from the attending nurse and the doctor on duty. She said, we have the video. If you contest this will, Mr. Klein, you will lose, and you will drain whatever assets your clients have left in legal fees. Daniel Pierce leaned forward. He placed a thick document on the desk. Now, let us talk about the forensic accounting, Daniel said. He opened the report. We have completed the audit, he said. The total amount misappropriated from the trust, including the original withdrawals, the Burger Barn franchise fees, the car purchase, and the $25,000 transferred to Stephen Jackson, comes to $168,000. He looked at Mark, with statutory interest calculated from the date of each breach. The total liability is close to $200,000. Mark didn't speak. He just breathed, heavy and loud. Daniel outlined the options. Option A. Daniel said, we file a civil suit for the full amount. We will allege fraud, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty. We will depose you, Linda, and your brother Stephen. We will submit the probate petition you filed as evidence of perjury. If we win, and we will garnish your wages. We will put a lien on your retirement accounts, and the judge may refer the perjury charge to the district attorney. Linda let out a whimper. Option B, Daniel said. You accept the terms of the settlement we are proposing today. What terms? Randall asked hoarsely. Mark and Linda accept the disinheritance without contest. Daniel said, they agree to refinance the Civic into Mark's name immediately, holding Emily harmless. They return the $25,000 from the brokerage account to Abigail within 30 days, and they sign a confession of judgment for the remaining balance, which Abigail will agree not to enforce as long as they make no attempt to contact her or disparage her. Wait, Linda said. Her voice was trembling. Not contact her? That is right, Daniel said. You leave her alone. But she is our daughter, Linda cried. She stood up, reaching toward me. Abby, please, you can't do this. We are your family. I looked at her. Her eyes were swimming with tears. But all I could see was the woman who had stood in the kitchen and whispered. It was for the girls anyway. The woman who had watched me struggle with rent while she drove a car bought with my money. We did it to keep the family afloat, Linda pleaded. We were drowning. Abby, we just wanted everyone to be okay. You wanted to look okay, I said. There is a difference. Mark sat up. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the old, defensive anger. You are enjoying this, aren't you? He sneered. You get the house, you get the money, you get to play the victim. You are so cold. Abigail, you are just like your grandfather, cold and obsessed with ledgers. I stood up. I am not cold. Dad, I said, I am just finished. I looked at Emily. I am leaving. I said. Emily stood up too. I am coming with you, she said. Emily? Linda cried. Don't you walk out on us too? Emily turned to them. I am moving out this weekend. Mom, she said quietly, I found a roommate, and I am not driving that car anymore until the title is fixed. But why? Linda wailed. Why is everyone leaving us? Because you stole from us. Mom, Emily said, and you still don't think it was wrong. She walked to the door and opened it. She waited for me. I looked at Daniel. Draw up the papers, I said. We walked out. The climax didn't happen in a courtroom with a gavel banging. It happened in a quiet hallway of the county courthouse 2 weeks later. We were there to sign the final settlement agreement. The house had been transferred. The brokerage money had been wired. The Civic was being refinanced. I stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot. It was snowing lightly, the flakes drifting down like ash. Daniel handed me a pen. This is it, he said softly. You sign this, and it is over. You get the lump sum from the brokerage. You get the house. They admit wrongdoing, and in exchange, you agree not to pursue the criminal charges or the civil judgment. I held the pen. It felt heavy, like lead. If I signed this, they walked away. Broken, yes. Humiliated, yes, but free. They wouldn't go to jail for the perjury. They wouldn't lose their pensions. They would live their lives, telling anyone who would listen that their ungrateful daughter had stolen their inheritance. But if I didn't sign, I could crush them. I could push the button that Daniel had built. I could put them on the stand. I could make them answer for every lie. I could watch them lose everything. It was a seductive thought. It was the justice I had craved when I first found that folder in the closet. But then I heard Eleanor's voice. Don't let them decide who you are. If I destroyed them, if I spent the next 5 years of my life dragging them through courts and depositions, who would I be? I would be Mark Jackson's daughter. Forever locked in a dance of resentment with him, I would be defined by the theft. Daniel watched me. He knew what I was weighing. What do you want your life to look like 5 years from now? He asked gently. Do you want them bankrupt and exposed? Or do you just want to be free? I looked at the settlement. Full release of claims. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an eviction notice. It was evicting them from my head, evicting the anger, evicting the need for their approval. I looked down the hallway. Mark and Linda were sitting on a bench near the elevators. They looked old, defeated. They weren't monsters. They were just small, selfish people who had made a series of terrible choices, and they were no longer my problem. I realized then that the old version of my family, the one I had tried so hard to protect, the one I had brought potato salad to, the one I had loaned my credit score to, was gone. It had died long before Eleanor did. I looked at the pen. I looked at the signature line. I capped the pen. I didn't sign it. Not yet. I need a minute. I told Daniel. I walked past him, pushing open the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and cleansing. I walked down the steps to the sidewalk. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the winter chill. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an unknown number. It might be the mediator calling to see where I went, or it might be that job in Chicago, the one Eleanor had told me to apply for 3 weeks ago. Project lead, a new city, a new start, a place where nobody knew I was the girl who sued her parents. I looked at the screen. I looked at the sky, where the gray clouds were finally starting to break, revealing a sliver of pale blue. I let it ring. I stood there on the pavement, caught between the justice I could exact and the mercy I could grant, holding the rest of my life in my own freezing hands. The phone vibrated against my palm, a heartbeat of possibility. I didn't know what I would do in 10 minutes, but I knew that whatever I chose, it would be my choice, not Mark's, not Linda's, mine. I took a breath, and for the first time in 32 years, I exhaled completely. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It's been a long, emotional journey for Abigail, and I hope it resonated with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Do you think Abigail should sign the settlement and walk away? Or should she go back in and pursue full justice? Let me know in the comments below, and please tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories so you don't miss the next one. We have more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption coming soon. Share your thoughts in English, and thank you for being part of our community.